It was about 1972 that some cavers from back east were sent to this cave for that very reason. You can go in this cave, there's nothing much worthwhile. It's a tight, squeezy, muddy old hole, and you'll probably leave and go back home. But they made their way for the first time through this very tight squeeze and into what's known now as possibly Arizona's most beautiful cave. The story goes on that those cavers took a lot of pictures here, and when they got back home they developed the pictures. They sent them back to the cavers here in Arizona saying basically thank you, wrote them a letter, thank you for sending us to such a beautiful cave here. We thought you were going to send us to something that was of very little interest. And the cavers here thought, well, they're kidding, so they wrote back and said, ha ha ha, very funny. Where really were these pictures taken? What were they a cave back there, maybe in New Mexico, Texas somewhere? And through an exchange of letters or phone conversations, they finally convinced the Arizona cavers that the pictures really were taken here. So, of course, the Arizona cavers came out into this cave, finally found their way into this passage, and that's where we're headed today.
As Jerry and the other cavers make their way to the main chamber of the cave, they pass many outstanding formations. When you cave in a world-class cavern of extreme fragility and extraordinary beauty, there is always concern of adequately protecting the cavern decorations. Everyone on the team is acutely aware of the damage inflicted on the cave environment by careless cavers that rush through the cave. They take their time as they carefully head to their destination. Most cavers don't realize they are producing a minute amount of damage every time they walk past a delicate speleothem. This unseen damage to the formation is caused by factors such as airborne dust and is cumulative in its effect. The changes to a cave are imperceptible until someone who has not seen the cave for a few years is shocked by the extent of the damage due to constant cave traffic. Because of careful management and limited access, this cave is still in a relatively pristine condition.
1,000 feet offshore from the quiet community of Crystal Beach, Florida, fresh water boils to the surface of the Gulf of Mexico to form a slick. Beneath the surface, a rock conduit carries the fresh water to the sea. Within this conduit of fresh water, surrounded by salt water, exists a unique ecosystem and beautiful geologic formations. The first 1,200 feet of cave system is a tunnel at an average depth of 50 feet. This section of cave is called Thunder Road because motorboats passing overhead can be heard by the divers below. Albino crayfish inhabit all freshwater areas of the cave system. In this footage, we witness a territorial dispute between albino crayfish. At a penetration of 2,300 feet and at a depth of 130 feet, the divers discovered the mystical dragon's lair. dragon's lair, a white bacterial cloud sits in the middle of the water column. Above the cloud, fresh water flows towards the entrance. The warmer salt water below is stagnant.
The Wildcat stream trunk is large, noisy, and dark. Most of the water comes into this passage through side leads which connect with the main Culberson stream passage. The Insurgents is only about a half mile away at the Culberson main entrance. At this time of year, the water is very cold, close to freezing. The first breakdown is a three-dimensional maze of jumbled up, sharp, jagged rocks. Since our trips to this area are few and far between, we had to spend a good portion of our time finding the way through. It didn't help that I was the only one on our team that had been all the way through the first breakdown. One thing we didn't have problems finding was the stream. We could hear it no matter where we were in the breakdown. In spite of the fact that it hadn't rained for the past few days, the stream level was up a bit from what I remember a low level should be. Our next trip took place in July 1995. We made it through the first and second breakdown without incident, so we will start at the far side of the second breakdown. There is only about 300 feet of canyon before reaching Death Siphon. This was a really interesting trip because it was advertised as an NSS convention guided trip into Culberson Creek. On the sign-up sheet, I had indicated that the cave was very wet and that photography and videography was planned. I didn't want anyone to be surprised when the lights and camera came out in the middle of the cave. At one point there were 12 cavers signed up, but when Wednesday morning rolled around, we only had a total of 6, including myself. I had indicated that this would be a fairly rigorous cave trip in which we would be doing videography, but some of our members were a bit surprised when I asked them to carry batteries. However, no one really complained, and as it turned out, everyone had a great time. It was definitely a trip to remember. No one complained about deep water either, mainly because it was fairly warm, around 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This section of the canyon is very different than the part before the first breakdown. There are more deep pools here, treacherous footing and jumbled up rocks. There are numerous drop-offs and rapids which makes this section of the canyon very noisy. The ceiling is very high, which contributes to the long and eerie echoes which bounce around when we try to talk to each other. Between the echoes and the noise of falling water, it can be very difficult to hear one another unless you yell directly into your friend's ear. One thing I hadn't planned on, but should have, was the requirement of using a hand line while crossing the lake. So of course, we only had enough webbing to make it part way. We were actually able to solve the problem by stringing together all the scraps from our packs. This allowed us swimmers to get around the corner and out of sight.
John took off his helmet and fought against that current to get as far back in as he could, and he got back to where there were about 3 inches of airspace over the water. His lips and nose were scraping on the ceiling, and he was off the end of the hand line as I treaded water to wait for him. You could tell that we weren't going to make it through the siphon because of the lack of airspace. John and I decided to turn back, and he swam back to the hand line while I waited. We then just held on and had an easy ride back as everyone pulled us in back across the siphon.